English translation, 334th contact. Monday, 3rd February 2003, A034 hours.
Enjana, this is a pleasure. Greetings. I just wrote a saying. Look here. The only way to get rid of a temptation is not to simply give in to it, but rather to powerfully dissolve it and master it. With this and various other sayings that I've already written since A0, 13 hours, and that I will continue to write after your departure, I am finishing my book, Sayings, Poems, Aphorisms, which I have been writing for exactly 60 years with my birthday today.
Greetings also, my friend. I would also like to send you best wishes and greetings from everyone. I find your words good, and I would be pleased if you would give me the resulting work as a gift. It would be a special honor for me. And the fact that you are completing a 60-year work today is special, because I think that no Earth human has ever compiled a book work during so many years. I also note the uniqueness that you began with this work when you were only 6 years old, which also means a uniqueness because you were already able to read and write at that age, and you already had the reason and intellect of an adult human being, which is also expressed in your other works that were written down early on.
You know about that. Who told you these things?
It is well known to all of us, so to our whole population. Since on the Earth the 66th birthday of a human is considered a special day, which is known to us, your day has also been commemorated on Era as a result of many requests in your honor, which is why your entire life story will be openly presented for several hours via our worldwide communication system to all Aran human beings, who take a great interest in your work as well as in your life and your mission. What is it, my friend? You look at me so strangely and have a strange expression on your face.
Somehow I am embarrassed.
But it was done in your honor. So you do not have to be embarrassed.
But it is to me, because I am not a zoological animal to be put on display.
You should not look at it in this wise, which I know about you. You cannot see your honor in the same context that you keep away from the earthly public, which you do rightly. What we did to honor you on your 66th birthday by popular request was not a sensational affair, but a worthy tribute to your person and work. It was neither a sensational presentation nor a praise, as you like to call it, as I have been told on various occasions.
Then it was really only an appreciation in the form of a statement of the facts.
That is the meaning of my words. You can be reassured, because the honoring of your person and work was a well-considered, honest and just honoring in mentioning the actual facts of your life, your work, and your mission, whereby no embellishments were allowed.
Then I can agree and express my gratitude. I also do not want to forget to thank you for the greetings you have brought me, and for which I have not yet thanked you.
There are also many greetings from the population, from humans you do not know by name.
I also want to express my heartfelt thanks to them.
It will be my pleasure to deliver your greetings.
Thank you. Since you visit me today, I assume that Florina is absent?
Yes. Florina has been assigned a task that will take up her time for the next few days, which is why she cannot take over the corrective work regarding contact meetings on the next 2 Thursdays, which she regularly does with you and Bernadette. However, since I am her permanent deputy in this and other matters, I will of course be responsible for my task.
Glad to hear it. With Ptah, is everything going well there? And will he return soon?
Everything is going according to expectations, which means that no difficulties have arisen and none are to be expected. His return will still take some time.
What also interests me, what can be expected in terms of life and physical concerns in the foreign universe?
According to the latest information, no human life forms have been found yet, neither in a more highly developed nor in an original form. On several occasions, however, very low life has already been found.
You mean microorganisms?
Yes, and in many different forms. But higher life must already exist in this universe, because different amino acids, etc., were found. Ta expects that sooner or later he will also encounter human life.
I am curious about that. Speaking of human life, 7 more humans were killed when an American space shuttle, called Challenger, was torn apart on its return flight from the International Space Station to Earth. Do you know this and the reason for it?
We watched the terrible event. The accident resulted from the irresponsibility of those responsible in such a wise that the flying apparatus, which was supposed to be designed for 100 and more missions, was already unfit to fly due to excessive overuse or too many missions. Because due to the multiple use, various technical and material defects had already become apparent, which would not have permitted further use of the flying apparatus. However, this was criminally disregarded in every wise. In addition, serious damage to the heat shield of the left wing occurred, which was so dangerous that the flying apparatus should not have been used for this reason alone. Since this was not taken into account, however, when the aircraft re-entered the upper layers of the Earth's atmosphere, an overheating occurred on the left wing, which caused part of it to be torn away and flung away, whereby the aircraft was pressed up on this side by the great resistance that occurred and turned into a lateral position on one side and into a dangerous downward position on the other. This resulted in an overheating of the entire upper part of the aircraft, causing it to be thrown around its own axis and, after about 90 seconds, torn into many pieces by the enormous powers acting on it, as well as the humans in the shuttle.
It is probably the case that the powers tearing the shuttle when it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere tear the materials much more violently and change them adversely than is assumed by the designers and other responsible persons. And therefore certainly fewer flights can be carried out with it than is claimed. Or am I mistaken? But this is then, as usual, denied by the Americans, who always want to hide their mistakes, as well as their political, secret service, military, and research crimes.
Your consideration corresponds to the given facts, also regarding the denial of one's own guilt for the crash of the shuttle. It is already clear that all means are being used to cover up the truth. The unfounded allegation that the aircraft was hit by a meteorite or by so-called space debris and thus brought down will also serve this purpose.
I thought so. The material is subjected to enormous stress, which can quickly lead to material fatigue. And that the Americans will wriggle out of the responsibility for the accident, or at least try to do so, is part of the daily routine, as it has always been the case with other events since time immemorial.
Material fatigue is an inevitable consequence of multiple stress. And with your words of denial of responsibility, it is also correct.
Exactly, I told you. But tell me, did Florina not tell you something about bringing me an enlightening answer regarding an ancient urn of bones? That was reported in all public media in the month of October 2002, which is alleged to be an urn with the bones of James, the son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. That is actually nonsense, because Emmanuel had his brother James, aka Jacobus in German version, come to Srinagar, where he also died at the age of 93 and was buried, while Emmanuel did not die on Golgotha, but also in Srinagar, Kashmir, at the age of 115 years.
Florina actually commissioned me with your question, which I passed on to Quetzal, since he is the authoritative luminary on the life and history of Emmanuel and his siblings. According to his instructions, I am to tell you that an urn with James's bones never existed, and therefore could not be found in Jerusalem or anywhere else in Israel or Palestine, etc. The bones urn that you mention, as our research has clarified, is a forgery, in the sense that it is declared as James's urn, which has nothing to do with the bones of James, Emmanuel's brother, for he actually died in Srinagar, as did Emmanuel, who was buried in Srinagar in the year 115, according to his correct birth time. According to the so-called Christian calendar, this applies to the year 111.
Emmanuel was never called Jesus, as his disciples accused him after his departure. And besides, in his time the names James, Joseph, and Jesus were very common, so that James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus, which should be written on the urn, will apply to another James, Joseph, and Jesus. Just like today, there were several ways that the three names could appear in a family at the same time.
Your question to Florina in this regard, which I also put to Quetzal, corresponds to that of the actuality. In Emmanuel's time, Quetzal explained, the names, as they are called, must have appeared 34 times as son, father, and brother. However, the bones urn in question is a forgery.
Ah, I thought so. By the way, I made the call to the governments I was asked to make in the form of Special Bulletin 2. Everything has already been sent out on the internet, and to all UN member states by email.
We know that. The entirety is a good writing.
Thanks. The question is, what will be the overall effect? Our Federal Council also received the bulletin by email. Let us see if this and the Swiss politicians learn anything from it and do something about it.
We are currently continuously analyzing the efforts, attitudes, and initiatives of all the governments of the world. That is why I can also tell you that various Swiss leaders are working for peace and an end to war. Unfortunately, there are also negative aspects to this. However, because above all, a plan is forming, especially in the new federal councillor Calmi's ill-informed world of thought, which will soon be rashly agreed to, namely, to take Saddam Hussein into exile in Switzerland. However, neither the federal councillor nor her supporters of the plan are able to see the serious consequences that this could have for Switzerland and its population.
That is a real blow. Is that woman out of her mind? But also all those who take up the same cause with her are out of their minds.
It has not come so far yet, but in the coming days my prediction will be true.
This is irresponsible if it should come true. The very thought of such an undertaking is reprehensible because it could endanger the security of Switzerland and its population. Just imagine that Saddam Hussein is secretly and clandestinely carrying out his murderous work in exile in Switzerland. There would also be the possibility that a terrorist network could be set up in Switzerland, and Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations could certainly be reckoned with. But with certainty, the Americans would then also establish themselves in Switzerland, at least in terms of intelligence services, and in such a wise that Switzerland would ultimately be under the American thumb. For America, the whole thing would be like a meal ticket to establish itself in Switzerland and ultimately take over our country. And all of this would be the fault of irresponsible ones who are not able to assess the consequences of anything and who are so America-friendly in their delusion that they cannot see what the American world police policy is actually aiming at. Unfortunately, there are enough lowly intelligent ones in Switzerland who howl in chorus with the wolf America and believe that from there, peace is spread all over the world and the economy is boosted. But the fact that everything is aimed at America wanting to take over the whole world and incorporate all of the resources of all countries because their own Earth's treasures are running out or have dried up. The pro-American and cheerful cheerleaders do not have the faintest idea of this, because in their arrogance and low intelligence they cannot think that far ahead. They believe that their social or professional position enables them to be capable of judgment and to think everything through. But they are truly no more than misguided by themselves, incapable of real consideration, deliberation, and judgment of the real situation. For this purpose, I would like to create the following saying, which is buzzing around in my head, and which is probably just good enough to say a lot in short words in the aforementioned relationship.
Peace and truth are constantly disappearing from the earth. Also with the loyalty, love and honesty, it is long gone with many humans. Because like dogs they only wave after stinking agitators, as well as warmongers, who bring many deaths, ruin, revenge, need, hate and misery over the human beings and the world. To the powers that be and to humanity on the earth.
To the powers that be and to humanity on the earth, specifically directed to George W. Bush, Josh USA, Ariel Sharon, Israel, Saddam Hussein, Iraq, Yasser Arafat, Palestine, and Osama bin Laden and their followers and supporters, but also to all other fallible and irresponsible state powers and terrorists, as well as their followers and pro and cheering ones who promote, support, or pursue war and terror in any wise. For about 10,000 years there has been only 250 years of peace on the earth, while all other times have gone down ingloriously in the annals of history, with bloody wars, revolutions, and terrorist acts of all kinds. Dozens of acts of war have been recorded every year in the most diverse countries worldwide during these times, which have cost hundreds of millions of human lives and have caused indescribable suffering for earthly humankind as well as enormous worldwide destruction. And in the 20th century there were even 2 world wars raging, from 1914 to 1918 and from 1939 to 1945. The climax of the madness of the Second World War was created by the Americans with the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima, Japan on the 6th of August 1945, in which about 250,000 humans were killed and much long-term damage to surviving victims was seen. 3 days later, on 9th of August 1945, the Americans also completely destroyed Nagasaki, Japan, by a further atomic bomb, killing about 70,000 humans according to official figures. In Germany, too, the Americans acted in a similar criminal and inhuman manner when they razed the military hospital city of Dresden to the ground with enormous bombardments. This happened under the Action Donnerschlag on the 13th-14th of February 1945. In 1939, Dresden had 630,000 inhabitants, and the 3 inhumane and irresponsible British-American bombings caused countless victims, since at that time there were also about 500,000 Silesian refugees, southwestern Poland region, and many forced laborers and soldiers present in Dresden. Official figures at first said that 25,000 humans had been killed in these attacks. But this was not true, which is why the number of those killed was later corrected to 250,000, but was later reduced again to only 35,000. This was done, as usual, to minimize everything, as was the case with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because the truth is that there were many more dead. Just think of the number of bombs the British and Americans dropped on Dresden. So 722 British bomber units dropped 1477.7 tons of mines and demolition bombs in two-night attacks, together with 1181.8 tons of incendiary bombs, which created enormous firestorms and walls of fire, which could not escape anything, nor the firestorms and walls of fire, which were created by 643.1 tons of American incendiary bombs. In 6 subsequent day attacks, the Americans dropped an additional 3,767.1 tons of demolition bombs, whereby these bomber formations consisted of 311 Liberator bombers, so-called flying fortresses. The area of total destruction was 12 square kilometers, while another area of 15 square kilometers suffered severe to the most severe damage. The abominations of the Americans listed above represent only a small part of the immense human criminal machinations, because all the times before the 20th century, since America was colonized many times by sectarian and criminal elements from Europe and integrated into the world as a new state, bear witness to many monstrosities of the Americans against humanity. One need not look far at all, but only the near extermination of the American Indians, or the monstrous crimes with slavery, when slave hunters criminally abducted black humans in Africa and enslaved them to America, with tens of thousands already being tortured, martyred, and murdered in Africa or on the slave ships, while the survivors in America had to endure a slave life of the worst kind, if not being tarred and feathered and tortured and murdered by racial haters like those of the Ku Klux Klan. Not to mention the fact that in the slave era, America had slave breeding farms where masses of slave women were brutally raped and impregnated by select breeding rams. This in order to create slave offspring, because this was cheaper than the slave kidnappings in Africa and the difficult transport of the enslaved humans to America, where tens of thousands of slaves were tortured and beaten to death or died miserably at sea from diseases, epidemics, thirst, and hunger. But note also all the countless secret machinations and murders of the American Secret Services, which have spread and continue to spread terror around the world and silence by murder all those who are brave enough to spread the truth about their own and the general real machinations of America. A country that poses as a self-appointed world police force and interferes and sticks itself into the affairs of other countries everywhere, even though they have absolutely no place in them and are generally undesirable. The American addiction to world domination can be clearly seen in these actions, for which millions of corpses have been unscrupulously walked over, and human blood has been shed, and unspeakable suffering and misery as well as pain. Need and destruction have been and will continue to be created. And the whole thing goes on endlessly in this wise, so there is no end in sight. The U.S. actor and later 40th U.S. President Ronald Reagan was an evil warmonger. In World War II, the 33rd U.S. President Harry S. Truman ordered the atomic bombing of Japan. In the Vietnam War, which was also called the U.S. Special War because of secret American operations in Vietnam, the American military committed such enormous war crimes that the mere thought of it drives the naked horror out of ordinary humans. Just think of the massacre of My Lai, for example. George H.W. Bush Sr., as the 41st U.S. President, broke off the first Bush-Gulf War in 1991, and now the second Bush-Gulf War is to follow, this time triggered by his irresponsible and obviously megalomaniac and bean-stupid offspring George W. Bush, who in his arrogance and self-importance acts as an omnipotent creature, and even worse in his bellicose actions as his creator. And this irresponsible and inhuman wannabe even threatens to trigger a nuclear scenario in Iraq, which in turn will kill hundreds of thousands or even millions of people, and this only about 3,500 kilometers away from Europe, which would of course be badly affected by such madness. And why all this? On the one hand, probably just to get Iraqi oil, and on the other hand, to spread American power throughout the world in political, economic, and military, as well as religious form. However, the aspect must also be taken into account, and it is obvious that Islam is to be fought because it is supposedly incompatible with the sectarianism of Christianity. So everything also boils down to a Bush war of religion. Although the Islamites, that is to say the Muslims, have not given the Americans any reason for such a war, if one just refrains from the minority of the mad terrorists, who in their fanaticism are not powerful in their reason, and all of humanity is watching all of these humanity criminal machinations in a cowardly manner, and is doing nothing to break the madness and the lust for power of those who bring death, suffering, hardship, misery, pain, ruin, and destruction upon the world and humankind. Various states, especially EU countries, join in the chorus of Bush's war cries. Nor can we expect the UN and the UN Security Council to be reliable and reasonable in their rejection of war, because they too are crying with the Bush wolf. Therefore, it will be only very few responsible and rational ones of a few countries who will defend themselves against the war machinations of the warmongers. But their voices will probably be shouted over by the fearful and cowardly irresponsible ones who start or even support the war roar. The irresponsible howling of these state powers and their followers and other supporters is based on sheer fear and cowardice, and is aimed at the fact that Iraq, with Saddam Hussein, represents the world threat, while America, with its wannabe cowboy Bush Jr., truly embodies the effective danger and world threat. Indeed, the greatest and most dangerous terrorism around the world emanates from America, with its president who feels himself to be the Lord of all things and God. If Bush's howling war really does lead to a military campaign in Iraq, then this could very well become the reality and fulfillment of the Enoch prophecies, and indeed in such a wise that the Third World War will actually begin with it. It is true that the old prophecy says in this connection that the Third World War is to break out definitively in the year 2006, but it is not to be stated whether this year is to be considered according to the modern calendar calculation or according to the effective time since Emmanuel's birth, which would then correspond to the year 2003. Another prophecy also speaks of an all-out war in the year 2011, but at the present time the year 2006 must be taken into consideration. For the past decades point to this time with the military and political machinations that have taken place. These were already certain events that were mentioned as clear early forerunners of the Third World conflagration, while the current machinations of the irresponsible U.S. President George W. Bush indicate that this will be the beginning of the actual acute development of the end of days that has been prophesied since time immemorial. And this will be a merciless war like never before, waged with nuclear weapons as well as biological, radiological, and chemical weapons. And for such a war, the old prophecies speak of the fact that about 2/3 of the earthly humankind will be exterminated, and such a tremendous destruction will take place on the earth that hardly any life can exist anymore. But the same prophecies also speak of the fact that in such a war as never before the whole world and humankind will actually be involved, so that no state and no people will be spared from it. Europe, like America, will be largely destroyed in the war, and people will die horrible deaths en masse, and only a minority will survive. This is what is written in the prophecies, which will be thrown to the wind, ridiculed and disregarded by all those who cry war. And if it really comes to the point that this Third World War rages over the earth, then this happens solely through the irresponsible madness of some rulers of the state, as well as their followers and supporters, to whom every human life is worth as much as nature and the existence of the planet. There are also many former rulers and their followers and supporters who are no longer in power. but who have done a lot to bring things to the point where the whole broken world situation is now in military, political, religious, and economic terms. Today, though, it is the irresponsible people who are hungry for power, such as, in the main, U.S. President Bush and his pro-hooting and cheering supporters and other advocates, but also the Israeli Ariel Sharon, the Palestinian Yasser Arafat, and the Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein, together with irresponsible leaders of European states who, in their fear and cowardice, believe that they have to be allied with America in order to be spared from war themselves. But if the Third World War really does break out, with America and Israel, Iraq and Palestine, and all the terrorists at fault, then all the howlers of war will have their howling stuck in their throats. All the figures of state power who howl with the big bad wolf America do not belong in their positions of power, because they work neither for the welfare of the people nor for a true peace, but only indulge in boundless fear and cowardice in their megalomania, their lust for power, their hatred, and their desire for revenge. These creatures should be removed from the people within a useful period of time, before they can bring more disaster, destruction, and ruin upon the earth and upon humankind. For there is still time to prevent further evil and further warlike and terrorist madness, when humankind will finally take up arms against such irresponsible rulers and warmongers, etc., and drive them from their positions of power before they can cause the final disaster. Humankind still has one last chance to prevent its and the world's end and the worst events in living memory, and to prevent the old prophecies from coming true. For if everything is put on the right track, and if humankind really lets rationality prevail, then the prophecies cannot be fulfilled. But if this rationality is not applied by the broad masses of humankind, and if they do not bring the powerful to reason and do not set them aside to bring rational and responsible powers into the leadership of the state, then doom is certain. The greatest evil in all this is played out by America, for its excesses in terms of self-appointment as world police, and in terms of the machinations of world-dominating ambitions lead to hatred and terror around the world, especially against America itself and against its allies. And the more America interferes in foreign affairs and settles in foreign states, the greater the hatred against all and everything American becomes. So the worldwide terrorism of Osama bin Laden and his terrorist network Al-Qaeda also arose out of hatred and revenge against America. And this terrorist hatred and the vengeance campaigns associated with it will increase even more, in line with America's hateful and vengeful actions. And this terrorism, which is in balance with the terrorism of America, will also contribute a great deal to the Third World War, because everything is irretrievably intertwined. So Osama bin Laden and his followers must also be eliminated, but not by American terrorism of a military nature, but by common sense. Rationality is not based on the fact that America knows, in whatever devilish form, it is monstrously arming its war material, while it prohibits other states from doing so and forces them into wars as an omnivorous world war power if they do not follow America's bidding. Arming oneself with all possible means to the devil and oppressing and enslaving others, bombing out and destroying everything is indeed the whole wisdom of America, as this has been proven over and over again since this state has existed. The peace-loving minority has not been heard in this country. But how could it be otherwise in a country where injustice prevails over justice, where the death penalty prevails and even many innocent people are executed, with no rooster crying out for justice? The fact is that as long as America interferes in foreign states, gets itself established in them and continues to play the role of world police and wants to annex and take over the whole world and all peoples, There will be hatred and terror as well as retaliation and revenge against America and its followers and supporters. Peace, freedom, and tranquility can only find a way to be realized when America withdraws from the world and disappears from all countries in which it has established itself militarily, politically, religiously, and economically. It must give up its world domination airs and graces, as well as the delusion of having to play world policeman. And America must develop in such a wise that it no longer tolerates any elements of warmongering in its government and among its people, as it must do in Israel, Iraq, and the Palestinian state. Also Sharon, Arafat, and Saddam Hussein belong to their state power position, just like G.W. Bush, but also all other state powers that are responsible for injustice, treason, terror, death penalty, war, suicide squads, political murders, secret service murders and crimes, etc., and abuse their power. Only a uniform standing together of humankind in an action against the fallible, criminal, irresponsible, power-hungry, unscrupulous, warmongering, cowardly, hateful, vindictive and autocratic state rulers and their followers, etc., in order to drive them out of their positions, gives the guarantee that the Third World War, which is threatening more and more, can still be prevented, and which would bring death, destruction, hardship, and horror, such as these have never been seen in their horror since the existence of the Earth and since the existence of the Earth humans. Therefore, human beings of the Earth, chase those of your state powers out of their positions who are irresponsible, criminal, treacherous, undignified, and dishonorable, and replace them with humans who take over the governance of the state, responsibly for the well-being and life of humanity, and therefore also for freedom and true peace and the preservation of planet Earth. Although such humans are scarce on Earth, they can be found with goodwill, a little understanding, enough rationality and patience, and they must be found and placed in positions of state leadership, for they alone guarantee the effective well-being and survival of earthly humanity and its world. And only such humans will be able to create true freedom, true peace, and real unity among the entire population of the Earth. But these leaders must be effectively humble, unselfish, honest, and worthy of such office, just as they must respect the life of every human being and every other form of life, as well as the nature and existence of the planet. Quetzal also spoke in this tone years ago at a meeting on the 31st of December 1988, when the following was said:
You are not to officially spread it until after the 1st of January 2003, the Enoch prophecy. This will be the time when you should make an appeal to the rulers of the earth, warning them that World War III is imminent unless politically peaceful ways are immediately taken and pursued worldwide. You should then also point out that this great threat emanates especially from America, Israel, Iraq, and Palestine, whereby America in particular will be the greatest evil, which wants to establish itself militarily and economically in all states worldwide, and thus, among other things, provides the reasons for the fact that, especially in the Islamic world, large and powerful terrorist organizations are arising, which prepare death, terror, ruin, and destruction all around the world, and especially target America, whereby many other countries will also be affected. But Israel and Palestine and Iraq will also be in this evil game, with the main blame for all the evils being laid at the door of the warmongering and warring ringleaders, George W. Bush, Yasser Arafat, Saddam Hussein, and Ariel Sharon, as I have said before. If things do not change for the better after the new millennium, then, according to Enoch's prophecies, in 2006 the Third World War will be inevitable, in which 2/3 of the earthly humanity will lose their lives. The reason for this is that enormously deadly weapons will be used, which are based on biological and chemical as well as atomic and radiation sources. Thus, a catastrophe will come upon the earth and its humanity such as has never been seen before and never will be seen again. But reason can still triumph if it is allowed to prevail and removes all irresponsible state powers and their supporters and followers from their offices and replaces them with responsible people who use their positions of leadership solely for the good of humankind and thus also for true peace and real freedom. The irresponsible and criminal elements of state power and self-importance and their followers who cry out for war and terror must be immediately removed from the people, especially in the coming period when the irresponsible and despicable powers of America, Israel, Palestine, and Iraq, which I have mentioned earlier, are indulging in their deadly and destructive delusions. Of course, there are many other state powers that irresponsibly abuse their power. But the real ringleaders of all calamities are the powerful and their followers in the states of America, Israel, Palestine, and Iraq.
I see a bleak future, but I will do my job when the time is right and start in January 2003. Surely some rational human beings will be taught, but the majority of the dull people and the irresponsible powerful of the world will probably not be among them. So I think that all warnings and explanations will be useless, because who will listen to a single person? So I will continue to be a lonely caller in the desert, which only a few consciously perceive and follow his advice. Nevertheless, it is necessary to raise the word and shout out into the world everything that needs to be shouted out. It is true that, as usual, the shrewd ones will stupidly proclaim that such statements and utterances and explanations will only be made and given when an evil threatens, otherwise they will not be spoken of. A statement of lowly intelligence, which, however, has neither hand nor foot, because truthfully, it has been spoken of again and again and again, and indeed since time immemorial.
So much for the excerpt of the conversation, to which only the following is left to say: human beings of the earth finally become rational and turn to true life, live according to the creational natural laws and recommendations, and get rid, in a humane manner, of those fallible, irresponsible, and criminal powers of the state who, in lust for power, self-glory, hatred, and in vindictiveness, etc., drive humankind into hardship, misery, horror, and into many deaths, and in doing so also destroy human achievements and nature as well as the world itself. Human beings of the earth unite in rationality and love, no matter what religion, race, and people you belong to. In a dignified manner, make those criminal and criminally powerful statesmen and terrorists who work against the good of the peoples and all humankind disappear. Remove them from their despotic, dictatorial, and terrorist power and send them into exile for life, so that they can never again cause mischief and cannot continue to bring death, destruction, and ruin to humans and the world. Replace the fallible ones with humans who deserve the designation of human and who prove themselves worthy to take the lead over the earthly peoples and all humankind, and to work for their well-being and for true freedom and real peace, without falling into lust for power, self-importance, and greed for profit, as well as into hatred, vindictiveness, bloodlust, revenge, warmongering, murderousness, and terrorism. And time is pressing, otherwise the madness of the old prophecies will be fulfilled, which speak of the most terrible events and degenerations of all times, which will ever have taken place since the earth exists and humans have appeared. Simyase, Silver Star Center, 30th January 2003, 11:54 hours Billy.
The clarity of your words leaves no doubt, and your sayings are true and good, so there is nothing more to say.
I really should be saying what I have to say in public.
That would be desirable because it corresponds to necessity.
Perhaps I will manage to write another special bulletin if I can gather some more material. It does not have to be all about what was said, as it will certainly suffice if I reproduce the parts of our conversation concerning Saddam Hussein's exile in Switzerland.
I think so too. Nevertheless, I could still, but no. It should be enough. Then it is time for me again, because I still have some work to do. Goodbye, my friend. On Thursday, we will get in touch with each other again when Bernadette and I will dedicate ourselves to the corrections and paperwork.
Salome, and goodbye.